Harry Fuller was 45 years of age. He was a car dealer and he was known to carry around a lot of cash. He was often seen at car auctions, buying and selling cars, always looking for somewhere to store them. He was newly married to his wife Nicola. She was 27 and known by her family as Nikki. Nicola worked part-time at a shopping centre. She was a shy, private woman and it took time to get to know her. But once you were her friend, you were a friend for life. Harry was the opposite. He was a lot older than Nicola, a larger-than-life character, open and very confident.
Harry was just the opposite. He was considerably older than her. Very likeable character, though. Larger than life, but he seemed to come from a different way of life than that we were used to.
He brought Nikki out of her shell and she seemed to really enjoy life, being with him.
Harry was always protective over Nicola, always doting on her. The house was always full of flowers, and he opened doors for her and came home with small gifts often. Harry seemed to treat Nicola very well. Harry had the gift of the gab, as one friend would say. He was very charismatic. He had a lot of money and he had expensive cars. He always drove Nicola around, picking her up from places. He was referred by some as a con man who didn't tell the truth, referring to the way he sold cars.
You're a gentleman. Just leave it to me. No problem. Cheers, mate.
Now, the couple had met in June, and by August they were married. And this was 6 months before this case began. Nicola's family loved Harry, and he quickly became part of the family. Harry mostly worked over the phone, handling sales verbally and mostly with cash. He often carried around large amounts on him. Now, the day before this case began, Harry had spent the afternoon with a friend at a car auction. They had been searching for a car for his friend. The couple had a holiday booked to Fuerteventura the following week, and Nicola was so excited to be getting some sun. The couple were renting a cottage in Wadhurst, a market town in East Sussex in England. And on a Tuesday night, February the 9th, 1993, Nicola and Harry were at home. Nicola was getting ready to go out and meet friends. That night, Nicola sat in a local restaurant with friends, chatting and talking about her upcoming holiday. She seemed really upbeat. And when it got to 11 p.m, Harry pulled up outside to pick Nicola up. He popped in to say hello to everyone, and they went off together and headed home. That same evening, Harry had taken a call at home before he'd picked Nicola up. Now, this was unknown to anyone at the time, but for some strange reason, Harry had started recording every single phone call that he took. On the call he had taken that night while Nicola was out, Harry had agreed to a very early morning meeting the next day, which was very unlike him as he always got up late. The call was with a man only referred to as Steve. Now, early the next morning, as it was still dark outside, there was no one around, most people were still in bed. A mail carrier was driving past the cottage and down the road and was suddenly startled by an unexpected car pulling out fast from behind the Fullers' home. The postman later said that it was normally super quiet that early in the morning, but the car came straight out in front of him and cut him off, which was why he remembered it. Half an hour later, witnesses say 2 men walked up to the cottage, which they later tell police when they called in the tip. But no one saw if they stayed for any amount of time or if they left. They just saw them arriving at the property. Then Harry left the cottage about half an hour later, so it's assumed that those 2 men just left. He left the door slightly ajar. He went to a nearby shop at about 8:34 a.m. to buy cigarettes, and this was seen on camera footage, and he was home only a few minutes later. Nicola's mum called the home phone at around 8:45 to 9 a.m. that morning after not hearing from her daughter since Sunday. It was so strange that she had not heard from her daughter, and she was starting to become concerned, so she called the house phone every 5 minutes for about half an hour, but nobody answered. But by this time, both Nicola and Harry had been murdered. Nicola's parents called the police later that night after not hearing from their daughter all day, and they accompanied the police to the couple's home. Nicola also had not shown up for work on that Wednesday, and when police got inside the house, it was silent and dark. They found the bodies of Harry and Nicola. Both had been taken out with a GUN. They were found about 10 hours after they'd been killed. Harry was downstairs in the utility room and Nicola was upstairs on the bedroom floor. There was a white powder that had been sprinkled all over Harry's body, and police believed it was to try and make them believe that it was a substance-related incident, but it was just powdered sugar when tested. The casings were found outside the utility room. Harry had been SHOT once in the back, and Nicola had been SHOT 4 times, 3 times while she was likely on the stairs based on the blood patterns, and once she'd made it into the bedroom, she managed to call 999, England's emergency line, and the recording was 6 minutes long. Police say that they heard screams, then just movement, draws, footsteps, until they heard a loud shot, likely the 4th shot at Nicola. The police didn't come after this call as they thought it was just a child playing around on the phone. The operator handled this call as if it was a hoax. Nicola's father later sued over this negligence. He was told that the operator was sick over it and that they would do an internal investigation, but they wouldn't share the results with him and they'd deal with compensation through their lawyer, telling him the identity of the operator and how they handled it was not his concern. Soon after, a neighbour came forward and said she'd also heard the noise at 9 a.m, but didn't realise that's what she'd heard until she found out what had happened. Early in their investigations, police found the recording of the call with Steve, held the information for a while, not wanting to tip off the possible killer, but released the recorded call. On it, a man said, "I popped over last night, then arranged to meet the next morning just for a quick 10 to 15 minute meeting."
How are you doing? First thing, too early for you? About 8. I popped over last night to see you. There were some lights on. He's gone away. He's left them with his missus. So we'll zip down there. Won't be long. About, 10, 15 minutes. They're down the other side of Roberts Bridge.
Investigators were asking this man to come forward, but no one ever did. Also early on, police were certain that the Fullers knew the person that had done this to them. They were searching for suspects and a motive. Then a manager at a bank across the street came forward to police with their outdoor security footage. The camera pointed out onto the street to a shop on the corner on the other side. The man going into the shop that morning was a regular customer and easy to identify. It was Harry. He'd gone to the store, as we'd said earlier, 8:34 that Wednesday morning to buy cigarettes, which helped fix the timeline. Police found a recorded voicemail from a man named Colin who'd left a message telling Harry, "I'm going to come over and we're going to talk about what you did to me last night. I am pissed." But the call had been made a long time before and related to a falling out between the two. Investigators say there was a lot of red herrings in this case, so they started to dig deeper. Police began to look into everyone who knew Harry to look for a motive, and a lot of people told police stories about how Harry had lied to them about cars. Harry tended to either lie or exaggerate, including about money. He was known to boast about how much cash he had, and it was often an exaggeration. He'd say he had 40,000 in cash when he would really have 4,000 in cash. Or he'd whip out a bunch of cash and say, "Oh, there's much more in the attic, I have a lot more money." Then a man named Steve Young called the police, telling them that he'd worked with Harry and that he'd got insurance from him. Police told him there was no need to come down to the station and that someone would be in touch with him soon. After the police released the call, Steve Young got a call from a friend who told him his voice had been on the news. This friend told Steve, "I don't want to be involved, but you need to contact the police. That's your voice, mate." Then 2 different anonymous callers told the police that's the voice of Steve Young. Police had already received 160 calls, with people giving up other names, and they now needed to narrow it down. Before they did this, Steve Young wrote a letter to police where he said he was in the area on the day of that morning and that the voice on the tape was his. He also told the police that he'd told Harry if he ever found a good car, he'd let Harry know. He told police that he did go to meet Harry that morning. They knocked on the door, but then no one answered. Steve then walked to the police station and handed in the letter. And ultimately, Steve Young was interviewed. Police asked Steve if he would have come forward if the tape had not been played. He said no, which looks super suspicious to police. He said it's because he didn't think he saw or heard anything that could help. Now, as you know, YouTube is a bit funny with certain words and basically demonetizes your videos. So for the small pellet things that we find in GUNs, I'm going to call them AMOs. I think you'll get the idea. Police asked Steve if he had any GUNs of any kind, and he said that he did own 4 and was a member of a GUN club. After the interview with the police, Steve Young was arrested. He admitted to being at the scene, lying about it, and having the same type of GUN used at the crime. Steve's home was then searched, a home that he shared with his wife and 2 children. At his home, police found a press for making AMO. When asked about it, Steve said it was just to save money, but this homemade AMO matched the scene of the crime, and the markings were the same. When they asked Steve about the car, he'd recently taken it to the shop for work. His car phone was used on the morning of the murder to call Harry's home. And when police went back to the video from the bank, Steve's car was not seen on the tape at the times when he said he was there. So police looked before and after. His car, a customised VW Golf, was easy to find. He'd been in the area driving to Harry's at a different time than he'd said. Could this be earlier or later? Then police found that Steve had deposited £6,000 into his account the day after the murders. Police knew that Harry had at least £13,000 in cash in the house, and they hadn't been able to find it. Police also found that Steve was using insurance premiums from clients to pay his own bills, so he was in trouble with money, and he didn't have the money to pay the insurance accounts. But right after the murders, he had money, funnily enough. He told police that the money came from home, from money he'd been saving up in his safe at the house, which didn't make sense with his financial situation. This guy was desperate for money. He was broke. He'd been asking friends and clients for help with money, and he kept a list of each person he'd asked whether they'd helped him or not, and how much they'd given him. Back at the house, police found a loaded 9mm in his child's bedroom under the bed. He said he put it there because it was not legal, and it was loaded. He also was so cold and unemotional during the interviews with police, they nicknamed him the Iceman. Now, it's important to note that this GUN used to kill Harry and Nicola was never found. However, the AMO used in the GUN matched what was at Steve's home based on the markings from his homemade AMO. Police found a record of him purchasing an identical GUN illegally. The case went to trial, and all of the info above, included the recorded phone call, was laid out for the jury. Steve Young, who was 35 years of age at the time, was found guilty of the double murder of Harry and Nicola Fuller, with robbery as his motive. Police believed that Steve's meeting with Harry about a potential car was a ruse to make sure he had a lot of cash with him. Steve appealed his conviction because, apparently, jury members got together at their hotel during the trial. While a little drunk, they managed to find a Ouija board, and they tried to contact Nicola and Harry to ask if Steve Young had killed them. They got a wine glass, they put it upside down on the board, and they tried to reach Harry Fuller. And apparently they did, according to them anyway. It's what you believe. But apparently Harry came through on the board and told them Steve Young did it, and to vote guilty tomorrow. And when they asked the board how Harry died, it said SHOT. Although the jury said the Ouija board didn't affect their decision, Steve won his appeal and was granted a new trial a month after his first trial ended. Steve's new trial lasted 5 weeks, and he was found guilty a second time round, and this time he was given 2 life sentences.
Good evening. A double murderer whose original conviction was overturned because jurors had used a Ouija board was convicted again today and given 2 life sentences.